The Gorilla Story. One night, a young man was driving on a long and lonely highway in the middle of the woods. Suddenly, the tire on his car gave out, and he had to pull over to the side of the road. This was just terrible timing, as he was new to the area and had no idea where he was. Worse yet, the sun had just set, and now he was alone in the dark forest, and a rainstorm had rolled in. But before the young man gave in to despair, he looked up to the nearby hill and saw the glow of lights. There was a house up there. Thrilled, the man started hiking up the hill right away. It took a long time, and the young man was very tired and wet from the rain. But soon he neared the top of the hill and saw the house before him. The house was very grand. It seemed to be a large mansion. It was sprawling and had many rooms. The young man was hopeful that the owner would have a wired telephone he could use, as he was so far out in the wilderness that his cell phone had no reception. Cautiously, the young man approached the giant front doors and rang the bell. He could hear the chimes echoing inside the house beyond. A moment later, the owner of the home opened up the doors. "Hello, sir. I'm sorry to bother you so late in the evening, but I'm afraid my car has broken down. Would you happen to have a telephone I could use to call for assistance?" The owner of the house was a curious-looking old man. He wore a bright red robe and had thick glasses that made his eyes look enormous. "I'm sorry, but I'm afraid the storm took out the phone lines," said the odd old man. The young man's shoulders drooped at the news. Hearing this, the old man spoke again. "But why don't you stay the night here? I have plenty of rooms. You're welcome to stay until morning. Then I'll see about getting you some help." The young man was extremely grateful for the old man's hospitality. He shook his head and then he shook his hand and then followed him inside the enormous home. The old man's estate was filled with many odd things. He had old statues and taxidermied animals lining his walls. He also had many shelves filled to the brim with old books and odd medical instruments. The old man guided the young man to the room he would be staying the night in. It was large and very comfortable. It had a luxurious, soft bed and a roaring fire in the fireplace. Before the old man wished him good night, he turned around. The old man now had a serious expression on his face. "You're welcome to wander around. You're welcome to wander about as you wish while you stay here. I have but one rule, a rule you must obey while you stay here," the old man said. "Of course, anything," the young man replied. "Look at anything in my marvelous collection. Touch things if you like. All except my pet gorilla. You are never to touch him." "You have a pet gorilla?" the young man asked in surprise. "Yes, I do," the old man replied with a smile. "Would you like to see him?" "I've never seen a real gorilla before." "Yes, I would," the young man eagerly responded. "Very well, but remember, never ever touch him." The old man yet led the young man down another long hallway. At the end, there was a large iron door sealed tight with thick, heavy locks. The old man undid each one, then opened the door. Behind it was a set of elevator doors. He pushed a button, and suddenly those doors opened up. The two men climbed into the elevator and rode it down, down, down. Finally, they stepped out into a massive room. At the center of the room was a cage, and inside of the cage, sure enough, was a gorilla. The young man looked for a while, and after having his curiosity satisfied, he thanked the old man and said he was ready to go to bed. So up the elevator they went. They closed the heavy doors behind them and locked the locks. The old man wished the young man a good night and gave him one last warning. Remember, the one and only rule here is that you are never, under any circumstances, to touch my pet gorilla. The young man gave the old man his word and headed into his room for the night. He climbed into the luxurious bed and tried to get some rest. The trouble was, however, that the young man could not stop thinking about that pet gorilla. Why was there a rule about not touching him? The poor creature seemed awfully gentle when the two men were down by its cage. In fact, more than anything, it looked quite shy. For what reason did the old man think it was so necessary to warn him against it again and again? The question burned at the young man's mind until he couldn't take it any longer. What harm would there be in taking another peek at the gorilla? Maybe then he would see a reason for a warning. So the young man walked back down the long hallway and back to the large iron doors. One by one, he opened the locks and then pushed the button. Down, down, down. He rode on the elevator until again he was back in the large room. Once again, the young man walked up to the gorilla's cage. The poor thing wouldn't even look at him. He approached, and the gorilla seemed to back away as if scared. This made the young man feel terrible, and he wanted nothing more than to comfort the poor creature. So he ignored the old man's stern warning and reached inside of the cage. And then, very gently, the old man touched the gorilla's shoulder. As soon as his hand touched the creature, the gorilla went ballistic. It began howling and screeching and beating its chest. Terrified, the man started running away back towards the elevator. To his horror, the gorilla bent the bars apart on his cage and began barreling after the man. When the doors opened, the man jumped in and began mashing the button to close the doors. When the elevator began to move up, the man breathed a sigh of relief. But moments later, he could hear the screaming gorilla below him. It was climbing up the elevator shaft. Horrified, the young man jumped out of the elevator and slammed the iron doors behind him. He was in such a hurry, though, that he didn't lock the locks. Instead, he ran straight back to his room. All the while, the young man could hear the gorilla screeching. It tore through the heavy iron doors and began tearing through the rest of the house. The man could hear things being ripped apart and tossed about. Terrified, he crawled under the bed to hide. Moments later, the gorilla made its way to his room. The man was petrified, trying desperately not to make any noise. He could see the gorilla's feet and hear its heavy breaths. Suddenly, the gorilla grabbed the bed and heaved it across the room, revealing the man underneath. The young man closed his eyes, awaiting his horrible fate, when suddenly the gorilla slapped his shoulder and screeched in delight. "Tag, you're it!"